Hello, and welcome to Farcical Moments from History, where I look at various events that, as ridiculous as they sound, really happened.
In this episode, we will look at some of the behind-the-scenes antics during the creation of my all-time favorite movie, Back to the Future. While it is justifiably considered a beloved classic by most people, it is worth noting that it was almost a complete disaster, with studios initially rejecting it, severe problems with some of the actors and major props occurring during filming, tensions with the studio over its production, and an initially worrisome test screening.
I came here in a time machine that you invented. Now I need your help to get back to the year 1985.
When Robert Zemeckis and Bob Gale first came up with the basic storyline of Back to the Future, the first major hurdle they encountered was that most of the major Hollywood studios had very little interest in it.
For one thing, the two of them had yet to be considered bankable, as their previous films, including the Steven Spielberg-directed epic war film parody 1941, had made very little money at the box office and had received mixed reviews. In addition, they were continually told that Back to the Future was too soft as a comedy to sell, as raunchy teenage sex comedies like Porky's and Fast Times at Ridgemont High were dominating the box office at the time, and that Disney would be the only studio interested. Ironically, when they tried to sell Back to the Future to Disney, they were told that the subplot of the past version of Marty's mom falling in love with him was too dirty for the House of Mouse, as they felt that it counted as incest.
I don't know how it could have possibly reached that conclusion.
All this, of course, left Zemeckis and Gale frustrated and wondering what the hell they could do. Even though their friend Spielberg supported the film and was anxious to help them make it as soon as possible, they eventually convinced him to wait until they got a successful film under their belt before they made it, as they were afraid that if the film became another financial and critical failure, their careers in Hollywood would be ruined, and they would be accused of only getting films made because of their friendship to Spielberg. Zemeckis and Gale, however, finally got their big break when the former was given the chance to direct the romantic comedy Romancing the Stone by a producer who had liked his earlier films. To his immense relief, the film ended up being a hit, causing many of the studios who had previously rejected Back to the Future to come around and offer to make it. In an admirable show of loyalty, Zemeckis and Gale approached Spielberg and asked him to produce it. Spielberg enthusiastically said yes and arranged a deal with Universal to make the film.
Damn, where is that kid?
With work on Back to the Future finally underway near the end of 1984, Zemeckis and Gale set about casting the movie. While the casting of the lovably eccentric inventor Doc Brown and Marty McFly's parents had gone off without a hitch, the casting of the pivotal role of Marty himself posed a problem. While from the beginning Zemeckis and Gale wanted Michael J. Fox for the role, they were continually told that he would be unavailable during production due to his prior commitments as the lead in the popular sitcom Family Ties.
Since conventional wisdom held that an actor couldn't possibly film both a show and a film at the same time.
Frustrated, they went ahead with auditioning other up-and-coming young actors, eventually whittling down the choice between C. Thomas Howell, who Spielberg had worked with on E.T. and personally preferred along with Zemeckis and Gale, and Eric Stoltz, who was starring in Universal's upcoming biographical drama Mask. Inexplicably, the studio made it clear that it wanted Stoltz cast as Marty. Despite their reservations, Zemeckis and Gale agreed to cast Stoltz, as the executives at Universal made it clear that they expected the movie to be ready for a summertime release, but also promised to allow a recast if major problems arose. Interestingly, Stoltz's casting led to the casting of Thomas Wilson as the villainous but dumb bully Biff Tannen, humorously enough named after an executive at Universal who did not get along with Zemeckis or Gale, as he was the only good actor who auditioned who could believably be physically imposing to Stoltz. It did not take long, however, for the uneasiness surrounding Stoltz's casting to become justified, as his more drama-oriented sensibilities as an actor had a negative effect on not just his understanding of the film, but also in his attempts at giving a comedic performance. According to actress Leah Thompson, who played Marty's mother Lorraine, at the first table read of the script, Stoltz took issue with the film's ending, claiming that it was an unhappy ending where Marty was trapped with a version of his family that he doesn't know, which caused everyone present,
who understood that the film was meant to be fun and not overly serious,
to be taken aback. Things only got worse as production commenced. For one thing, Stoltz insisted on being only referred to as Marty and refused to answer to his real name, which drove most of the crew nuts. Also, Stoltz routinely showed just how uncomfortable he was being in a comedy, as his performance came off as too serious and too reliant on emphasizing punchlines, instead of the naturally reactionary persona that Zemeckis and Gale had in mind for Marty. In addition, his method-acting persona caused tensions with some of his co-stars. For instance, when filming the scene in which Marty and Biff almost have a fight in the school cafeteria, Stoltz kept digging his nails into Wilson's chest every time he shoved him, despite Wilson repeatedly asking him to be gentler. Eventually, following over a month of filming, Zemeckis, Gale, and Spielberg, reviewing the footage that had been shot and, given the studio's mandate of a summer release, already partially edited, realized that Stoltz was not working as Marty. Realizing that something had to be done quickly to save the film, Spielberg got the permission of studio head Sid Sheinberg to fire Stoltz and do whatever was necessary to get Fox cast. Upon being offered the role, Fox immediately accepted. However, since his time filming Family Ties had the first priority still, he would have to shoot his scenes in the film during weeknights and weekends for 3 straight months, during which he would get on average only a few hours of sleep at a time. Despite this, Fox's enthusiasm never diminished, and his cordial attitude and lighthearted persona were a breath of fresh air to the production. The recast, however, did unfortunately cause another to be recast besides Stoltz. Actress Melora Hardin was originally cast as Marty's girlfriend Jennifer. After Stoltz was recast, it was decided that she needed to be recast too, as she was much taller than Fox, which many of the female cast and crew felt would make them as a couple not look right on the big screen.
Remember, this was long before the Big Bang Theory showed that such a pairing could work to a degree.
In the end, Claudia Wells, who interestingly enough was originally considered but initially unavailable, was cast as Jennifer, and Hardin would have to wait a couple of decades before being cast as the love interest of a short guy in a funny comedy.
Well, whatever's natural, the first thing that comes into your mind. Nothing's coming to my mind. Jesus, George, it was a wonder I was even born. What? Nothing.
Even though Fox's casting of Marty was a welcome change, it didn't end Zemeckis and Gale's actor woes. Crispin Glover, who played Marty's father George, regularly butted heads with Zemeckis and Gale throughout filming, as Glover regularly tried to change the way his character looked and acted, and often had to be forced into sticking to the script and his character's wardrobe. This was especially the case during the filming of the film's ending, in which Marty returns home to find that he had inadvertently changed the present into one where his father was successful and no longer a perpetual doormat. When Glover arrived to the set that day, everyone was chagrined to see that he had dramatically changed his appearance, now wearing a sleeveless tank top and baggy pants instead of the casual suit and shades that he was supposed to wear. After trying in vain to aggressively convince everyone on set that his outfit was a better look for George,
As only a batshit crazy guy like him could,
he was forced into his approved wardrobe. He also antagonized Zemeckis by voicing his disapproval of the film's ending, which he felt was shallow and materialistic.
Boy, he would love internet critic culture.
After Stoltz was recast, however, he was forced to back down, realizing that he too could be fired. Nevertheless, in the end, Glover showed just how bitterly petty and delusional he was by not only refusing to attend the film's premiere, but also ended up demanding to be given the same amount of money and preferential treatment as Fox, even though George was not one of the main characters when pre-production of the sequels began.
Which of course led to him being recast. And interestingly enough, later successfully suing Universal over using his likeness in the sequels without his permission.
Are you telling me that you built a time machine out of a DeLorean?
The way I see it, if you're gonna build a time machine into a car, why not do it with some style?
In the earliest drafts of the screenplay, the time machine was stationary and made out of an old refrigerator. As Zemeckis and Gale refined the screenplay, with suggestions from Spielberg, they decided that not only could there possibly be a legal liability from having kids possibly shut themselves in refrigerators in order to act out the film,
How ironic.
but also reasoned that it made far more sense for a time machine to be made out of a vehicle so that it could be easily moved around. When it came time to deciding what kind of vehicle, they took inspiration from one of their favorite gags from the screenplay, where Old Man Peabody and his family mistake the time machine for an alien spaceship. Upon pondering what contemporary cars looked like spaceships, they came to the conclusion that a DeLorean would be the perfect aesthetic choice.
Of course, they really didn't know at the time just how shitty a car the DeLorean actually was, let alone that its namesake would be busted for being a 2-bit Tony Montana.
This decision was solidified early on in pre-production when Ford offered $75,000 if they made the time machine a Mustang as a piece of product placement, only to be sharply rejected, with Gale stating bluntly, Doc Brown doesn't drive a fucking Mustang. In the end, 3 modified DeLoreans were used in the film, one for stunts, one used for scenes where the actors were visible, and a cutaway one for close-up shots.
It did not take long, however, for the cast and crew to find out just how unreliable these cars actually were.
Not only did they break down a lot, but as a result of their rather weak engines, they were rarely able to get up to speed for the shots of the time machine reaching 88 miles per hour during its time jumps. In addition, the claustrophobic interiors of the redressed cars caused some discomfort. Fox in particular recalled years later that he regularly scraped, cut, and bruised his hands while filming scenes of Marty operating the time machine. As it turned out, many of these issues would later end up being addressed during the production of the second and third films, as the DeLoreans used in them had their mechanical parts completely replaced with better performing ones. Of course, despite these problems, the DeLorean time machine would itself become a beloved aspect of the series and one of the most famous vehicles in movie history.
As well as my ultimate dream car. If only.
It just might work. Next Saturday night, we're sending you back to the future.
Okay, all right.
When Universal agreed to make Back to the Future, it came with an initial suggestion by Sheinberg that was almost fatal to the film. Whereas Zemeckis, Gale, Spielberg, and most of the executives at Universal all agreed that Back to the Future was a great, catchy title, Sheinberg felt that it was confusing and nonsensical. Instead, taking inspiration from both the scene involving Old Man Peabody's family and the scene in which Marty pretends to be an alien to frighten George, he suggested that a much better title would be, I shit you not, Spaceman from Pluto, after the comic that Old Man Peabody's son had on him when discovering the time machine.
Because that screams time travel story.
He even suggested that entire scenes, such as Marty pretending to be an alien to frighten George, be rewritten so as to insert references to this title. Panicked that Sheinberg would pull the plug on the film if his suggestion wasn't accepted, Zemeckis and Gale asked Spielberg, whose massive box office success with Jaws and E.T. had given him tremendous clout at Universal, to intervene. Knowing how prideful Sheinberg was, Spielberg diffused the situation by sending him a memo that said, Hi Sid, thanks for your most humorous memo. We all got a big laugh out of it. Keep 'em coming. With that, the title Back to the Future was secured. Interestingly, at a party celebrating the massive success of the film months later, when it was pointed out to him how the film had worked with its title, Sheinberg supposedly quipped, "But I'll never know if I was right or not."
To be fair, there have been some great time travel stories with arguably shitty titles.
No, this sucker's electrical. But I I need a nuclear reaction to generate the 1.21 gigawatts of electricity I need.
Doc, you don't just walk into a store and buy plutonium.
Throughout the process of refining the screenplay to Back to the Future, Zemeckis and Gale always had a clear idea in mind for a grand climax to the film.
Surprisingly, this was not the iconic clock tower sequence, but instead was a different way for Marty to get back to 1985 altogether.
In this version, Doc concludes that the only way to power the time machine, given its nuclear reactor, would be to subject it to a nuclear explosion. This would have resulted in Doc managing to smuggle Marty and the time machine onto a nuclear testing site in Nevada on the day that an atomic bomb would be tested. This sequence would have climaxed with Marty being discovered and misidentified as a communist saboteur, prompting an order to release the bomb early, and the time machine reaching 88 miles per hour just as the bomb went off, receiving the energy needed to return to 1985, and reappearing in front of a group of bewildered tourists.
In case you were wondering, yes, this was Spielberg's inspiration later on for nuking the fridge.
This climax would have been foreshadowed in the film's original opening scene, where Marty's in a classroom learning about nuclear bomb testing in the 1950s. While this would have been an epic climax in its own right, it did pose a couple of serious problems. First of all, it would have been very expensive to shoot. Also, it was a climax in which Doc was relegated to the rather passive role of watching things from a safe distance and talking to Marty on a walkie-talkie. In the end, this climax was scrapped when Universal executives told Zemeckis and Gale that they needed to cut a few $1 million out of the film's budget and relegate the majority of filming to the studio backlot. Pondering how to create a compelling climax with these stipulations, they eventually came up with the clock tower sequence, which ended up being a more fitting climax to the film overall in how it kept the action in the town of Hill Valley and had Doc play an active role.
Also, it avoided the issue of perpetuating popular misconceptions about radiation, which was especially fortuitous, as just 1 year after the film came out, Chernobyl happened.
Ah, Jesus Christ. Jesus Christ, Doc, you disintegrated Einstein.
Calm down, Marty. I didn't disintegrate anything.
With the hectic nature of the production, Zemeckis and Gale were understandably worried about how the film would turn out. This resulted in them nearly having panic attacks at the film's first test screening, which occurred at a theater in San Jose, California, just a few weeks after production had finished. The audience who participated in this screening knew the film's title and that Michael J. Fox from Family Ties and Christopher Lloyd from the TV show Taxi starred in it, but nothing else, let alone that it was a film about time travel. According to Gale, this created unease in the theater during the scene in which Doc first tests the time machine with his dog Einstein inside. At the moment that the time machine disappeared, this unease turned into a nervous hush, as the audience was worried that something awful had happened to the dog.
Good thing John Wick wasn't around.
While this unease diminished with the reappearance of the time machine and confirmation that Einstein was fine, there was a noticeable lack of positive audience engagement until the moment where Marty met the younger version of his dad. At that moment, the audience got what the film was about and began to respond positively to it. By the time the film ended, the audience was enthusiastically applauding it, much to Zemeckis and Gale's relief. Following another 2 hugely successful test screenings, an impressed Scheinberg pushed the film's release date from mid-August to around the 4th of July and agreed to allocate the necessary funds and manpower needed to ensure that the film would not suffer from a rushed post-production.
Which apparently is no longer a concern at Universal.
Marty! You've got to come back with me.
Where?
Back to the future.
In the end, after the numerous struggles to get it made, Back to the Future ended up being not just successful, but the biggest movie of 1985, grossing over $210 million domestically and over $170 million overseas.
Or over $505 million and $409 million in 2020 money.
This not only made Michael J. Fox and Christopher Lloyd huge stars, but cemented Zemeckis as an A-list director in Hollywood, who would go on to direct great films such as Who Framed Roger Rabbit, Forrest Gump, and The Polar Express. The success of this film also paved the way for 2 successful and awesome back-to-back sequels, in which most of the cast and crew, including Zemeckis and Gale, returned.
Which, with the exception of the original Star Wars trilogy, was a rarity back then.
Finally, Gale himself would not be involved in many films outside of Back to the Future, but would instead become the creative head of the franchise it spawned, ensuring that subsequent additions to it would maintain a consistently good quality.
An attitude that is sadly lacking in most big franchises today.
Thanks for watching this video. If you enjoyed it, please remember to like, share, subscribe, and ring the bell. Also, follow me on Twitter at PCNHGuy. If you want to help me make more videos similar to this, or you just want to support my channel, maybe consider contributing to my Pop Culture and History Guy Patreon, and get a shout out in my future videos and other benefits. Finally, special thanks to Patreon supporter L'Oreal McNabb.
Have a wonderful day, everyone, and remember the future is what you make it!